Hello everyone, thank you for coming today to my presentation on Muir Landing in the Lesser Slave River. So I'm going to go basically until about 1914, so we're not going to touch on Smith today, just Muir Landing in the Lesser Slave, and it's more than enough to keep us busy, trust me. So a little housekeeping, for those that haven't met me before, my name is Sheila Willis and I do live in Smith, or just outside of it. The history of this area is just fascinating to me. But in the building here, you'll notice that we have a bunch of crafts, collectibles, and upcycle items. If you'd like any afterwards, just let me know. I can arrange a purchase for you. I also have a magazine that I put out for sale. It's $50 for an annual subscription or $5 an issue. And that information can be found on INGON.ca. Like my little redneck curtain rod pointer. Anyways, so let's get on with it. So first, it's pretty common knowledge amongst archaeologists that the Indigenous people have been in Alberta for at least 13,000 years. A lot of that isn't substantiated by archaeological evidence in certain areas or specific areas, just simply because the digs haven't happened. This particular Oxbow Point is what it's called, was found not very many miles from Smith or Muir Landing. It was found on the Peace River Trail by friends of mine with Imber Archaeology, or they used to be known as Tree Time Services. Now the interesting point about it, first test hole. They just kind of picked out a spot that said, oh, looks like a good spot, sunk a hole and came up with this Oxbow Point. So for those of you not familiar with the Peace River Trail, Athabasca is down here, Smith is up here, and the trail ran on the north side of the river. They found this Oxbow Point roughly in this area, known as Tomato Creek. Now, it's identifiable by its little Mickey Mouse ears, so I'm told. Anyways, I'm not an archaeologist. But it dates the use of that trail from 4,000 to 4,500 years ago. So, obviously, the Indigenous people have been using the water routes for that long. So, if you'll notice where I showed you the trail, it is also the Athabasca River, and the Lesser Slave goes up this way, and it's the only outlet out of Lesser Slave Lake, so it would have been a natural pathway for them. The earliest recorded history of Lesser Slave Lake was by Alexander Mackenzie in 1793. So he was told by the Cree people that the big body of water was there, but also in the translation it was slave, where from what I've been told was a translation that really meant people that weren't like us, or people that were not of us. So it was the Dene people, and they moved farther north. So in 1793, the lake is referenced, and in 6 years, David Thompson came and mapped the area. So he came by Fort Augustus, which is Edmonton now, went up the Pembina River, down the Athabasca, then to the Lesser Slave River, getting there in April, and mapped it all the way up to the lake, just to the head of the lake. But within 6 months or 7 months, he had already had Francis de Coyne coming to set up a post there. He worked with the Northwest Company. So back to my little pointer stick. This is Smith, where we're at today, and the Athabasca River, and then the Lesser Slave River. So this portion here is in this little red square. That's where Muir Landing was. So Muir Landing is basically in this grassy flat, but Peter Fiddler came shortly after de Coyne to check him out because he worked for the HBC. It's like spying on the competition. And he gave us a really good clue. It says, upon a steep bank on the north side of the mouth of the Lesser Slave River. So this is very flat. I've been on the property, which by the way is private property, so no trespassing, but I have permission. And where the red arrow is where the steep banks start. So that's my guess of where that original post in 1800 was. I can't even do the math on that. What is that, 225 years ago? Yeah, something like that. So those are the earliest usages. And of course, once the fur trade came, it really came, and things started to be hopping around there. They had set up a post at Lesser Slave Lake Post. By that time, the Northwest Company and the HBC were combined, amalgamated, and Edmonton was the main fur depot, I'll call it. So they were moving fur down to Edmonton and bringing supplies back up to the trading posts at Lesser Slave Lake Post. Don't let that confuse you. That's really now the area of Girard, Capowino First Nation, and Sucker Creek First Nation. It is not the town of Slave Lake. So, and it said in the Edmonton Bulletin in the late 1800s that the Slave Lake people or traders were the only ones using dog teams anymore. Everybody else had moved on to wagons and railroad and stuff like that. So these are all actually Slave Lake fur traders, along with dog teams. And of course, then you moved on to the bigger beasts, the horses. And this is a survey party in 1911 coming up the Lesser Slave River on the ice. But in the summer, you had to do something entirely different, which was go by boat. And these are examples of scows. They would have started with Voyageur canoes, but as the fur trade increased, so would have the size of the loads. So when the scows were introduced, they would carry roughly 16 times the amount of goods that a Voyageur canoe would hold, but only took several more people to run. But you can see, if you can see in the picture right here, that's a canoe compared to the scow.
Huge difference.
Huge difference. So these things were 30, 40 feet long and 10 to 12 feet wide. Now, for those of you that are aware of the rivers in this area, they're shallow. Lots of sandbars, and the Lesser Slave in the bottom end of it anyways is full of rapids. So these didn't always float well, so they did what was called tracking. And this is probably the best picture I have of it. You can't see the boat, but what you can see is the harnesses attached to the men pulling the boat. Like they had to be tough as nails. I got this picture from Carolyn Hancock's Barber, who is James Cornwall's granddaughter. And this guy in the middle is Emerson Hugh, a famous author, writer. So, it kind of gives you an idea what they all had to do. And I always thought it was pretty much a young man's, well, I'm not going to call it a sport, young man's job. But when the Treaty 8 Commission Party came up the Lesser Slave River in 1899, they had to get the policemen to help them track the boats because the party of boatmen didn't come down from Lesser Slave Lake. But the lead guy that was training them was 72 years old, the lead Indigenous fellow. So tough as nails, like, whoa. And if they just couldn't pull it up the river, they did this. This is actually a picture from Grand Rapids, which they always had to portage around until the HBC put railway tracks on the island there. But anyways, you can see even in the background all the freight these guys are going to have to pack on their back to get around the rapids. So it was tough work running the rivers. And the Lesser Slave River, again, being the only one out of Lesser Slave Lake, they would have seen a lot of that activity. So from the scows, then they moved on to the steamboats. And I specifically selected this picture to start with. This is the Slave River, a steamboat owned by the Hudson's Bay Company, and it is actually up at Saw Ridge at the top end of Lesser Slave River. But that was the original town site of Slave Lake. So, but you can see the size of the boat compared to the size of the river and imagine them running that thing. Yeah.
Stuff a lot?
I would imagine, yeah. There's actually a lot of newspaper articles where, like, they broke timbers because they ran on rocks, and then they had to get people to lever them off, and yeah, all sorts of fun. So here's another view of the same boat, but this guy's hauling logs onto it, that's the fuel. So not only along the river did they run the boats, they also had logging camps out there cutting wood specifically for steamboats. This one in particular has all sorts of information on it. If you're watching on YouTube, you're just gonna have to pause it. But it would have been a really hard job, because eventually all of that easy wood on the shores would have been a little farther away, and pretty soon you're packing the stuff to get the boats, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this summer we have not enough water, not even close, but I'm gonna go whenever I can. I want to go down to the river. Zoltobri, my friend, got this picture for me and actually showed me this. I might have taken the picture, but he showed me. Can you see the old piling?
Mm-hmm.
That's from wing dams. They not only blew up the river a couple of times trying to make a channel, they dredged it, and they made wing dams. This is the only picture that I have found of a wing dam. And I found it absolutely by accident in the archives, of the Provincial Archives of Alberta. I don't know what section of the river it's on, but I'm also going to guess, you know, you kind of see the roughly water there. It might be, I'm assuming they put one on both sides of the river to raise the water level, and the sole purpose was to get those steamboats up and down. So, and then this is from, I'm missing a corner, well, March 19th, 1907, a dredge for the Lesser Slave, and I know they blew it up and had men clearing a 3-foot deep channel, the length of the entire river at least 2 or 3 times, based on what I've read in the newspapers. So, a lot of work to get up and down the Lesser Slave. Also from my friend Zolt, he is a metal detecting enthusiast, and these are some of his finds that he's found along the river, and I just threw them in here because I thought they were interesting. This right here, which is hard to see, is actually a homemade jingle from a jingle dress. Kind of fun. And all sorts of old coins. Is this one? He does have one too, where a lead slug was shaped into a dice. So, lots of interesting stuff. This is a net anchor, and I believe he found this somewhere near the Smith Bridge. I like that little train toy.
That's cool.
So I'm going to start from the top and work my way down. This was Sawridge. So when Mirror Landing was in its boom, it was bigger than Slave Lake. You kind of reversed that over years, but at the time, and you'll see as I get into the pictures, Sawridge had like the Hudson's Bay Post and the missions, etc. But Mirror Landing had a lot more businesses, and there was reasons for that. But you can see 2 of the boats. I'm guessing one is the Slave River, and the other one would have been the Northern Light, potentially, from the Northern Transportation Company. So, next down the river, and I'll show you these on a map in a second, is Soto Landing, also known as Salto Landing and Norris Landing. So it's right at the mouth of the Salto River, where it meets the Lesser Slave. And that's the boat that I showed you earlier, the Slave River. So I'll give you a couple of views of that. See, you got 2 big steamers in that one. And I'm not sure exactly, I think this is potentially, I haven't decided which river is which, like to know where it was situated on the banks. And then another view just for the heck of it. But when you're thinking that sometimes these guys had to portage because of the rapids up the Lesser Slave River, they had to go from Mirror Landing up to the Salto, which is about halfway. Show you a map in a second. But look at the wagon ruts. Can you imagine pulling a team and wagon through that? Or walking it?
Nope.
No, don't think so. Also, that's a good indication too with the guys pulling the boats.
Mm-hmm.
Think of those poor dudes. Okay, here's your map. So I showed you Sawridge of Slave Lake, right up at the top. Somewhere right around where the MD of Lesser Slave River boat launch is now, and Norm's Walleye World is where that would have been. So This is the Ottawa River, which I'll mention later. This here is Soto Landing. This is the Moose River. There was a stopping house there. And down here is Mirror Landing, and you can tell where I live. Anyways, that kind of puts it on the map and into perspective for you. And the Old Smith Highway runs on the north side of the river. Just people can go and drive and take a look at the river and see how narrow it really is. But I think it's also a good floating river, just for the heck of saying it. So, on to Mirror Landing. This is an early picture of Mirror Landing. You're going to see more in a second or two, but I'm trying to give you a positioning, I guess. So up here in this is Captain Barber's house. It was also the telegraph office. Now I mentioned the 1799, 1800 fur trade post. It would have been just up here somewhere. So this was the original warehouse in somebody else's home, I believe. They would have docked up here. Now if you look right in here, it almost looks like they made a man-made channel for the boat. I don't think that's a natural thing. And this is Athabasca Forwarding Company. So it's also a big warehouse. So they're right in that transition of expanding, because they also had, and for those that are here today on the table back there, I have some Mirror Landing artifacts from the Holt family. Their granddaughter gave me some things to put in trust until there's somewhere to store them, like if we ever get a museum or something. So they actually had a tent building, and they were here. You're going to see these pictures. Pioneer Druggist. There was a pool hall here. A couple more buildings are all scattered throughout. But this is that picture right there that I showed you, Athabasca Forwarding. Trying to kind of lay it out for you. Up here was Cornwall Rooms. It was a hotel. This would have been the big stables and the blacksmith shop. This is Captain Barber's house, and this is where the stables were, and 9 is that fur trade post. Just to kind of put it into perspective. Many of the cellar holes are still there, but like I said, it is private property, so no trespassing, please. This is a picture, so probably around 1910. Now you saw the big boats before. The smaller boats ran the lower half of the river up to Soto Landing. The big boats would never make it.
Okay.
So, and it's because they had something like 17, I've read all sorts of different amounts, and maybe it changed year from year, but anywhere from 17 to 26 sets of rapids trying to go over with these boats. So if the water wasn't the right height, they were hooped, quite frankly. So these are passengers waiting to get on to, I think this is the Northland Sun or the Northland Light. I can't quite recall, but it's a Northern Transportation Company boat. And I'll tell you why that's important in a second. Here's a better view. Now, Captain Barber homesteaded Mirror Landing for the purpose of it being a steamboat town. This is his sister. I think it's his sister, just based on the different photo. Now, that's, I'll call it the original Mirror Landing. Now, I pointed out the druggist, and then the Holt family tent that was a business is over there. And look at that. They even had ice cream. Woohoo! Another view of it. What a mess.
Slightly.
It just must be spring, right? So, again, the druggist. This is a pool hall with something in the back. Here's an unidentified building. And then there's the Holt store. And then way back here is the Cornwall Rooms. And I think this one was the stables. But yeah, can you imagine slopping around in that stuff? A farther away view. And again, Athabasca Forwarding Company, that building that I pointed out before. Look at the size of the stables.
I was gonna say, it's huge.
Yeah. Like, and so they were taking people up and down the hill, which you'd think was this hill, but the original trail is more over this way, that I've been down anyways. And you can see the bits of boats all over. And then you might not be able to see it, but there's horses in a wagon, and it's got a chimney out of it, so somebody's moving up the river. Another view. A little farther up the hill, so this is the stables, to put it into perspective. This is the blacksmith shop. Can you see the guy here all right?
Yep.
Okay. Look at these guys and the distance between them and him. Look at the size of that dude.
Tall.
Ain't no wonder you wouldn't want to fight that dude. Hopefully he was good natured, that's all I got to say.
Hammer in his hand.
Yeah, with the hammer in his hand. And yes, it did flood. So I believe I got this photo, it's in a different language, I think, because I can barely read it, but I believe this is around 1912. And one thing you're not seeing in the photographs I showed you so far, there's another street behind this one. So Mirror Landing had 30 to 40 businesses and about 300 people living there. So, I mean, it's bigger than Smith.
I was gonna say that.
Yeah. Is now, anyway. Yeah. Everybody goes to their local pool room in a boat. But anyway, so like I said, Mirror Landing was homesteaded, even though it had been used for a long time before that. When they really started the steamboat industry, Captain Barber is the guy that homesteaded it. And I believe it said he was there since 1906. This is his wife, Nellie Young, and their baby Manada, that you can barely see. Their granddaughter, Linda Collier, supplied me with this and other pictures. And this also was a telegraph office. Their home was a telegraph office. Side story. Captain Barber came from Ontario, and his dad was a well-known architect. And he actually designed one of the previous Winnipeg City Halls. But he was also a bit of a shyster, I guess. So when Captain Barber, his name was Charles Duffer and Allison Barber, or CDA Barber, called Duff. When he came west, his parents, from what I understand, were in jail because the woman, the mother, got some rich fellow in a hotel room in a compromising situation where Mr. Barber, the father, burst out of the closet and demanded a check. Well, the guy wrote a check and went downstairs and called the cops, so they kind of got busted for fraud. Okay? So, he's not of a reputable family in the days when it made a difference. Nellie Barber is related to the McDougals. So, McDougall United Church in Edmonton. Yeah. Harrison Young, that was the secretary on the Treaty Commission, that's her dad. So when they fell in love, they apparently spirited her away to Europe for a while to get over Captain Barber. Didn't work. And they ended up getting married. So he was, yeah, it wasn't the, according to the parents, not the ideal match made in heaven. But anyways, they thought so. And they both died at a young age, by the way. So another picture of Captain Barber, this on the Northern Light. That's why I think that was his sister in a previous.
Oh, yeah.
You see the outfit?
Yeah.
It looks like it, and the hair. So this is Nellie Young and Captain Barber. This guy I think I've seen in different pictures with James Cornwall, and I've never figured out who the captain of the boat is. Although I've looked. It's one of my history mysteries. So, when Barber filled out his homestead application, there's a question that basically says, does anybody else have claim to this land? And he listed James Cornwall, Peace River Jim, Apostle of the North, because they were running 3 steamboats out of there. So, that's where Cornwall comes in. Now later on, when the railway is coming through and the businessman of Mirror Landing thinks their boats just come in, they make a new town on the opposite side of the Lesser Slave to match the railway tracks and named it Port Cornwall. It was incorporated as the village of Port Cornwall. That's why.
Okay.
And even in Smith today, I might get this name a little bit wrong, being major or minor, but the Catholic Church is St. James of the Minor, I believe, and that's because Cornwall was the benefactor to build the first log church. So, little tidbits of information. Port Cornwall Board of Trade. This was ran in the Grand Prairie newspaper, I believe. Yeah, that says Grand Prairie up there, even though it's hard to read. Dr. David Leonard, a very esteemed historian, sent this to me. I was most appreciative. But, you know, they're advertising Port Cornwall, which is the new name for Mirror Landing, as the place to go to buy your goods because it's taking a week off your trip to Edmonton. So it was a warehouse town intended for supplies north. But the reason why I put all this, this is that. Okay? So the traveling public are well taken care of. Good restaurants and comfortable rooms are procurable, while pool rooms, bowling alleys, and shooting galleries offer amusement.
Wow.
Isn't that something? There's a splendid feed stables where horses are well taken care of and good bunkhouses for freighters. Like, they were doing the promo, right? And then that happened. And that was the death of Mirror Landing. Because when the railway came through, and interestingly enough, on the papers sent to the Municipal Affairs of Alberta to incorporate Cornwall and do all of those things that were setting it up to be this big warehouse service area, there were people from the railway that signed that. They must have known that Smith would have been put on the opposite side of the river.
Yeah.
And as soon as Smith was, that was the end of Mirror Landing. Most of the businesses just moved away or moved over here. And because the railway transportation was the new form of transportation, getting all the people up north, that was it. The steamboats also died, and Cornwall took most of his boats, along with Barber, to Fort McMurray. And most of them ran the rapids. They took them right over the Grand Rapids. So I know that Barber wrecked one boat in that trip. Yeah. And then Barber ended up going into World War I, and he had something to do with making maps, and there is a book online that you can get by Captain Barber for his map making. I can't remember the name of it. But he ended up, after coming back from the war, by this time him and Nellie had 5 children, and he went down to Duluth, Minnesota, somewhere near the Mississippi River, to run the steamboats there. And one account said he had pneumonia. I suspect he had Spanish flu, and he died down there. And she was pregnant with twins, and she died during the delivery of twins or shortly thereafter. So, like, there's almost a comparison between the town and the guy that helped build it, right? It's a sad story. So, a few other stories. In 1882-83, they were surveying up here. They were marking the meridian line. So, like, we're very close to the 5th meridian, near the mouth of the Lesser Slave. Ogilvy did that, but there was a guy by the name of William Thomas Thompson, and his job was to mark out the 6th meridian. Now, during this survey in the winter, they did what they called traversing, and I don't understand all this, I just read it. But over that winter, using the ice on the lake and the river, they basically mapped the shorelines of Lesser Slave Lake and the river itself. But Thompson I thought this was just an interesting tidbit, has nothing to do with local area. He started surveying at the age of 19, and he died at the age of 84, still on a survey job. And he's one of the longest running surveyors.
Wow.
Like, that's a 60 some odd years. Yeah. But anyways, in October of 1882, they're coming up to go do the job farther north and mark that 6th meridian. And they were tracking their boats up the Lesser Slave River. But one guy by the name of Vickers came from Edmonton and was taking a different route south of Deer Mountain, going up to meet them at the post on the other end, or on the lake, I'm not exactly sure, on the river. But he ran into 2 feet of snow in September. And I believe he had 11 horses he was supposed to bring. 6 of them died. Yeah, it's awful. So he ended up cashing his stuff and going to meet Thompson's survey party. They they stopped at the mouth of the Ottawa waiting for their horses and their supplies that this guy was bringing, but they weren't coming. Yeah. So it was like a month or two before it, but anyways, they're up there at the top of the river camping with no tents in October because he's got them, and they end up being stashed. So funny thing about it is, and I confirmed it, I don't know that they got everything out of this cache, but they made 4 trips trying to get their stuff. And finally Thompson said, if you don't get it this time, I'm just going to send to Winnipeg because it's a lot cheaper. So anyways, I just imagine these guys, they were on like pulling things on homemade little sleds and trying to make their way around. Yeah. There's oils and then there's eels. Actually, this surprised me when I found this. They found oil on the Lesser Slave River in 1882 and 83. And by October 83, under the laws of the state of Minnesota, the Winnipeg and Northwest Petroleum Company was formed to go bore for oil there. So one account says 4 miles, one account says 7. They had a property of 320 acres, but it was oozing from the ground over the whole claim. Interestingly enough, in today's, I was looking for it, that is where there is oil field activity now. I don't know if they ever bored, but a capital of $1 million in 1883 was a lot of money. So, anyways, had to do the Judge Clamp thing. Probably broke some copyright law, I apologize. Next, so the little red dot here, we're here. This is Treaty 8. Athabasca would be somewhere right about here, because it comes down on the elbow. Whoops, not very good with my redneck pointer. So in the summer of 1899, the Treaty Commission was going to Lesser Slave Lake, right there, that end, west end. They had sent out pronouncements that they were going to go negotiate Treaty 8 with the indigenous people there. So it was kind of a rough trip for these guys. They all met in Athabasca. They were supposed to be there on June 8th. Their boatman did not come down from the lake. So I already mentioned this. The police decided that they would start tracking the boats up the river, which was really quite a new experience for them. I have kind of a small theory on this, and that is if you hadn't seen a bunch of your relatives or community members for a while, and you're normally the boatman because you're indigenous and you're employed as a boatman, what better way than to just not, to give yourself extra time to talk and not show up to full boats. But anyway, that's my own personal theory. So they made their way up the Athabasca River and the Lesser Slave River on their way to Slave Lake. And these two guys they have something to do with the treaty, but not directly. Father Lacombe was employed by the government to help negotiate and be an advisor for the indigenous people. Father Gerard just had a really good interest in it. He's been all over the north, and he also accompanied the Treaty 8 party. So, Father Lacombe's 50th anniversary of his priesthood was celebrated on the Lesser Slave River, right by the Salto River, where Soto Landing was. Just an interesting side tidbit. So. That would have been 10 years before Gerard became Gerard, I think. Another interesting thing, Emily Murphy came up the Lesser Slave River.
Who's that?
Emily Murphy was one of the famous 4. She was one of the first women judges. Very much fought for women's rights early in time. She wrote under the name Janie Canuck, and there's a book, Seeds of Pine, that describes her trip up the river and people that she talked to, etc. I can't remember who this dude is. This is James Cornwall. He's River Jim. But this is another interesting fellow named Captain Shot. He's more down the Grand Rapids on the Athabasca, but interesting matey fellow that went over those rapids for the first time in a loaded scow with 6 nuns, if I recall correctly. So, interesting picture to see them all together, and I assume that's in Athabasca or Edmonton it was taken. All these guys, big name guys, Saturday Evening Post, Everybody's Magazine, Agricultural College from state of Illinois, yada yada. These all guys went in 1910 with James Cornwall on his Northern Transportation Company boats up and through the north, which of course would have been up Lesser Slave River. So this is Carcajou. He had this guy pose with him. The back of the card says something like, if you hit the north, you're wealthy, or something like that. But again, Emerson Hugh was on that. And there is a book, North with Peace River Jim, that gives really good descriptions of their trip up the river. So, and staying at Mirror Landing, etc. They're just some little side stories. I think we're almost done them. Oh, no. This is something we're all familiar with. I took this picture myself last year when we had the forest fire across the river. It wasn't the first one. So in 1910, do you remember Barber's house and the telegraph office?
Yeah.
Big forest fire jumps the river, June 15th, 1910. So, at that point in time, there were some ladies living in the house or working in the house as telegraph operators. That fire actually started on the Smith side, the south side of the Athabasca, and they thought they were perfectly safe because it wouldn't be able to jump the Athabasca River. The first indication that it did was when a burning timber fell on that house. And yeah, all heck broke loose. But that's not my favorite story. My favorite story is Henry Lawrence from 1895. He has come from Calgary with a grist mill and all sorts of other equipment for his farm up in Fort Vermilion. So he's like literally making his way up the rivers to go home. And when he was going up the Lesser Slave River, burning embers were falling on him, setting his boat on fire. Like, what are you doing there? Couldn't you have waited? Yeah, so they're literally putting their boat out. But yeah, a couple of, I guess, and we still find burnt pine in the bush, and that would have been from that 1910 fire, we're guessing. Actually make coasters out of them. So I'm not going to really touch into the Klondike Gold Rush. What I'm going to tell you is there was a lot of Klondikers going up and down the river. I say up and down because some of them made it and some of them gave up and came back. I forgot to put my slide in here in all honesty, but even after the rush, there were still people that, you know, they'd get so far and they wouldn't do a trip. And on my website, INGON.ca, I have a diary of one of those fellows. His name's Fred Brewer. So he made it up to Gerard and then turned around and came back. And I met his family. People tell me there's no historical tourism. I met his family from down in the States when they were retracing his path. So I am writing a book on 97, 98. I didn't bring my book. Oh yeah, I do have it here. Can I get it in here? Yeah. So that's my first book. In July, I hope to have the next one out, and that will be 97, 98, which is completely, well, not completely, but primarily the Klondike Gold Rush. Because, yeah. Okay, I'm going to tell you one of these stories, and I'll save the next one for later, another day. Colin Fraser's Unlucky Trip, December 1883. I have questions on this trip, but whatever. So they're coming from Edmonton, loaded with stuff for his trading post up at Lesser Slave Lake Post. I'm assuming it's a fully loaded scow, because it really doesn't say. It says a boat, but that makes sense. He had a guide, he had a crew, so likely a scow-sized boat. He makes it up to the top of the rapids. It has an S in the newspaper article. Now the rapids go almost to the Salto. Do you remember that halfway through the map?
Yeah.
Way back when? So I don't think he made it to those rapids, but maybe he did. But the ice was flowing, just starting to flow in the river, and due to a quote-unquote mishap, the boat spun down to the bottom and back to the mouth of the river, to the bottom end of the rapids. Nobody got hurt, luckily. However, it punched a hole in the bottom of the boat, and it took on 2 feet of water, ruining the sugar in the tea.
Oh, no.
So here you are in November. Weather's probably pretty cold if the ice is forming on a running river. And his crew leaves him and goes back to Edmonton except for 3 guys. And they're all there prepared to stay the winter if they have to. But how you procure a dog team or hire a dog team out in the middle of nowhere, somebody else had to have been going by. He manages to get a dog team and go back to Slave Lake Post, where he hires more guys with dog teams at 4 skins a day, plus their provisions, to bring all of this stuff back. But they'll only take 400 pounds at a time. I don't know if I said it way back when we were looking at pictures of scows, but if that was the case, those things can carry 20 to 24,000 pounds.
Wow.
It said it was an expensive trip, and I'm pretty sure it was. Yeah. So anyways, we'll leave it there. We'll save Bill Burns. Oh, we'll just tell you real quick. Bill Burns lived right by Sotu Landing. And he was a boxer. He came from the boxing circuit down in the States. At one time he met, what's the guy's name? I'll think of it. Samuel someone. He was a famous author. Anyways, carrying on. Those were the days of Prohibition, so the next best thing was go build a still and make your own, which he did. So he had this constant fight going on with the Mounties. So three of them, him and 2 buddies, decided to set up the Mountie that they were having this war with. And they took an old barrel and they went across the river, so it would have been on the south side of the Lesser Slave, and put this barrel there, threw some whiskey bottles or gin bottles around, and inside this barrel they put a trap. So then somebody anonymously reported this still out in the bush, and they went fishing. So they're waiting, and pretty soon here comes the Mountie up exactly where he was told to go, basically. So they hear him rustling around, and all of a sudden, and they trapped the Mountie. So apparently they took a while to get there and release the poor dude. Right, we'll leave it at that. So if you want to follow my stories, go to INGON.ca. I have a YouTube channel. I do put out a magazine once a month. I usually spend at least 40 to 70 hours researching whatever story it is that I'm putting in for the month. And they're $50 a year annual subscription or $5 a month. I also have history handouts that I'm just giving to people. They can print their own stuff on the back. So if you have a waiting room or you're a museum, you want something, restaurant, for your customers to read while they're waiting for whatever service you provide, just let me know and I'll shoot them off to you. So, have a good day, and I'll let you know what the next subject will be about.